It doesn't just come to us naturally. And we talk about envy today too. Envy, I don't know about y'all, envy can come to me pretty naturally. It just sort of happens. But then how do I address that? How do I train myself to not let those feelings of envy get the best of me? And that's part of what we do to get to the joy, because envy, as they say, as you know, is not a virtue. It's not the way we want to be as people, or particularly as Christians. So what do we do to counteract that or counterbalance those feelings of envy or other things that come up? So that's part of what we're talking about. And on your cheat sheet are listed the 8 pillars of joy. When you think about building your consciousness on this level, part of one of the things that helps to support joy is gaining perspective. We talked about that. Humility is one, humor is one, being able to accept something is one, forgiveness is one, gratitude today is one of the ones we'll talk about, particularly with envy, compassion, and generosity. All those kind of things. Having a mindset that's focused on the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, generosity. All those things supports a way of living, a Christian life, a joyful life that is also good. And in one of our chapters, we talked about the science. There's a lot of science that comes into this book that they bring in from time to time. And one of it is how our brain circuits work. So in our brain circuits, some of us have an ability to maintain a positive state. You maybe know those people. They just seem to be joyful and happy a lot. And then there's also the ability to recover from a negative state. And some people have a good sense of that, and other people have a hard time. They get down and they stay down. And what does that person need to do in transforming their mind? Part of the good of a brain circuit is to focus and not wander. And the meditation practices that we have done have aimed at giving us some focus, 15 or 20 minutes to focus on something, like an envy issue or a suffering issue. And how do we really calm our minds to think about that and really think it through? And those are some of the Buddhist practices that we have. And part of this, and relates to today's sermon, for those of you who heard it, we cannot bring peace if we don't have inner peace. The part of how we get to that joy is a sense of inner peace. And as Paul experienced singing in a jail cell in Greece, they can come in jail. Prisoners that we know of now, you'd think, hey, they're in jail, they can't have inner peace, but they have. They've come to terms with why they're there. They're there, they're going to make the best of it. And some of the really heart-wrenching stories from this week's chapters have to do with the suffering of prisoners in a Chinese prison. And I can't imagine how the inner peace, but this person did have some inner peace, a deeper joy, despite being, freezing cold and malnourished and worked to death and all those things that it's just hard to imagine. And part of what we've talked about is wrapped around Romans 12:12. Do not be conformed to this world, but be renewed by the transforming of your mind. This is about training your mind. And part of what we get in today is, just as a weightlifter, you get stronger because you pull on some resistance, whether it's your legs or your arms or whatever else it is. And that resistance is building your strength. It's the same type of thing as we trained our mind. Sometimes we're in a place of resistance. It's the opposite, though, of being a couch potato. Couch potato probably isn't going to be very physically healthy because there's no circulation. Maybe you're just eating a lot, the weight goes up, all those other type of things. So being in a place of quote unquote suffering, or just real life, because suffering is inevitable, you're going to find resistance every day. A way to train your mind based on some of those things. So this is the sort of an introductory and reminder of where we are. So if you do have a book, page 136, and if you're not at a table with somebody, you can certainly share if that works for you to look at these pages together. Thank you for that. When we're talking about envy, which is part of this chapter, I found this to be an interesting thing about fairness. We all have a, as a kid, that's not fair. Why do they get that and I don't get that? And we still do. But what they said is interesting is that's actually somehow built into us. So listen to this story. Fairness seems to be hardwired into our genes, and so we are very uncomfortable with inequality of any sort. Primatologist Franz de Waal has a video of an experiment with capuchin monkeys, I think that's right, are distant relatives who are often used in psychological tests as proxies for humans. In the video, which has gone viral, one of the small-headed, long-limbed gray monkey gives the experimenter a rock and then receives a cucumber slice as a payment. The monkey is quite happy to do this over and over until he sees his neighbor perform the same rock-giving task, but receiving a grape. In the world of the capuchin monkey, a grape is better, a sweeter food than a cucumber, perhaps for humans too. After the first monkey sees his neighbor getting a grape, he performs the rock-giving task again, yet although more eagerly this time, and his head is now perking up in expectation of his great reward. However, as required in this experiment or social comparisons, the experimenter gives the first monkey another cucumber instead of a grape. The capuchin looks at the cucumber in his hand, pulling his head back in seeming disbelief, and then throws the cucumber back at the experimenter. In uncontrollable rage, the monkey grabs the bars of the cage and shakes them. And this video became popular and all this other type of things, particular because it so succinctly, during the time of the Wall Street protests in the United States some years ago, it succinctly and pointedly revealed how fundamental instincts for fairness work and why inequality is stressful and damaging to society. So there's all of a sudden a moral implication on it, right? Something bigger than that. When we see, why is this? I'm working 60 hours a week, but why am I not getting the same thing this person works for 60 hours a week? I'm retired too. How come I'm not getting the same retirement? And we think, well, shouldn't that be fair? So I've always thought of that fairness as sort of a stubborn, silly, jealousy, bad, envious thing. That no, not everything is fair, and not everything is fair. But this seems to say that there is something in our genes that looks for that kind of fairness. And what this chapter is going to do is it's going to, as it does with all these things, the monkey is upset because the monkey is not being treated fairly. Individual. It's a self-gratifying thing. What this book does is to turn that around to say, part of what we do in finding joy is seeing that others are treated fairly. We're not going for the self being treated fairly, but for society, with some fairness in all that's going on, which is obviously what we try to do in churches with outreach and other type of things. ELL classes are that kind, circles of hope is that kind of thing. Hey, this person in circles didn't get a fair shot in life for whatever reason. And what can we do to help them have a shot or a fairer shot? So that's part of what's going on with this. The next paragraph on 136, the Archbishop and Dalai Lama spoke frequently through the week of dialogues about the need to address inequality on the societal level. Yet, however, as much as we address these large global imbalances, as the Archbishop has pointed out, there will always be people who have more than we do, or who are more successful, or who are more talented, or smarter, or better looking, etc., and etc. The next page, I thought this was a great quote, about 4 lines down. If you worry about inequality, if you want to be poor, find some rich friends. If you want to be rich, find some poor friends. It's all relative, right? And part of what we end up doing is we compare ourselves, but often all we do is comparing ourselves to someone up the proverbial ladder. Rarely do we see down the proverbial ladder. There's a lot of talk in this country, for example, about the 1%, which is what the Wall Street protests were about. But what if we talk about the 10%, or the 15%, or the 20%? Well, I would guess we are all in the 20%. And then there's 80%, at least society speaking, who don't have some of the pleasures and privileges and things like that we do. And how do we deal with that? And that's like the number one pillar here is gaining perspective. Our perspective is don't just look up the ladder, remember down. and how that gives us an opportunity for some joy. Not joy that, oh, look, I love you, but that isn't heaven. I've just been fortunate that and that brings in the gratitude piece, which brings the joy piece. And there's a great quote about houses here we'll get to in a second. But I want to stop right there and see if you have any thoughts or questions. Vic, you look concerned.
Well, I could talk a lot about that kind of thing, but remember that prayer, Lord, give me this surrender to accept things I can't change and the courage to change things I can.
Right.
And growing up, my grandparents always taught me. I used to ride around with my grandfather. He would help people in distress, and it was a sense of our Christian responsibility that we had to list without judging what their circumstances were.
Right.
And what drives me, I think you and I talked about what is gluttony.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it in my business being real estate as people who, well, I don't like the pink granite countertop, I want the gray granite countertop, and they'll spend thousands of dollars on this when we've got somebody down the road who's, doesn't have a countertop.
Right.
It's been an interesting journey being as old as I am thinking about these things.
But perspective on that, which this chapter gets into, is we don't know about that family what their generosity looks like. Maybe they give away what it ends up being 100 times more than the countertop a year to different charities, to hospitals, to schools.
The problem is I know what they don't.
Well, that's right. But we never, but that's the thing. You just, at this last one, we'll read about problems and whatever else. It's a good, again, a perspective game. But you're right. There are some things we can change, the people we interact with. I feel helpless sometimes, honestly, about what do you do about world hunger? What do you do about environmental destruction? There's some things I can't change, but there's some things I can, which is one of the reasons I bought an electric car. It's like, okay, I'm going to try to do something, and I can not pollute and go around and I'll do my part, but I can't make everybody buy an electric car, or I can't, all those other type of things that you might change to do. Or the same with world hunger. I can go and work at Fidgets and Loaves. I can donate there, and I can do something about hunger here, or somebody that I see. But even last week, when asked someone on the highway on the off ramp, looking, get very suspicious of those folks. So they obviously they're looking in need for whatever reason. They're in a bad way, but I usually like to direct those kind of folks to this shelter or this kitchen or this whatever else to say the help is there. You need to go and find it in those places. It's hard.
Well, the thing about the capuchin monkeys and feeling about the cucumber and the grape, it made me think of the gospel of the people that worked in the vineyard,
Yes.
1 hour, 10 hours all day
Right.
long, and they all got the same pay.
Right.
And I understand that's about Kevin, but still there is that. What?
Yeah, no, it is. But it's the same. That's that could have been plugged into this very story. It was like, what is it? There's something that's there. Yeah, but you're right. It is about, grace is grace. Whether you work at it for an hour or work at it for a lifetime, it's given, and there's no more of it or less of it. It's just grace. And,
But there's that.
but there is that. Because we're looking at it in earthly terms.
Sure.
In those words. And when we, in that case, looking at it in divine terms, there's a different perspective.
Thank you.
So, flipping over then to the next page, 138, the first full paragraph, the Archbishop went on to offer a powerful remedy for envy, which is gratitude, again, one of our pillars. I think that one of the best ways you can begin to counter it is one of the old adages of counting your blessings. That might sound very old grandfather style, but yes, it does help. You might not have as big a house as that person, but you know what? You're not living in a shack. So be thankful for the things that you have, things that you do in fact have that can help. And he goes on to say, what does he say about the house? The last full paragraph. The very best thing to ask yourself is, why do I want a house that has 7 rooms when there are only 2 or 3 of us? Why do I want to have it? And you can turn it on its head and look at how we are in such a mess with climate change because of this desire to consume. And so that's just a perspective piece. Okay, I have this feeling, but why do I have this feeling? Why do I want that? Is it my ego? Is it that I need to fill a house? Is it, all those other type of things? And that's just where the joy comes. Like, that was sort of silly to start thinking that way. The thought it came naturally in the sense that it popped into our head with it. We didn't plan it there, but then we can uproot it. We can weed those things out of what we're doing. And then on page 143, there's a list of some preventative measures. And this is the type of thing that I was talking about with the flood and all of that. Like physical illness, the Dalai Lama insisted, this is the top of 143, preventative measures are the best way. Yes, if some disease has already developed, there is no other choice but to take the medicine. So similarly, once a person develops a strong negative emotion, like anger or jealousy or envy, it is very difficult to counter at that moment. So the best thing to do is to cultivate your mind through practice so that you can learn to prevent it from arising in the first place. For example, the major source of anger is frustration and dissatisfaction. At the moment when an emotion like anger is full blown, even if we try to use our expertise and our knowledge to reduce it, we find it is very difficult to stop. At that point, it is like a flood. During the monsoon season, it is too late to stop the flooding. We need to start early in the spring and investigate what is causing the flooding and try to build flood walls to prevent disaster. It just seems so simple, right, when you say it, but may not necessarily be that way.
Rob, I love what he says, and I can't remember exactly where it is in here, but about the mental fitness.
Mm-hmm.
We have to get mentally fit, just like we have to be physically fit, and you referred to it a minute ago. But when you think about it, you really do. You have to get yourself in a place where you can handle adversity. You got to get some sleep, you got to get some exercise, you got to eat, you got to, take time off from things.
Right.
Because if you're all stressed out and then those things happen, you just lose it.
Sure. Like our immune system, when that's stressed out, our immune system is
mental
reduced.
immunity.
That's right, the mental immunity. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Again, it makes such good sense.
I know.
So why don't we do it sometime?
I'm backing up to page 142. They introduced a term mudita, which is a little bit about our mental practice or our joy practice for the week when we get to it. And just like Ubuntu, it's about understanding our shared humanity. It goes on to say that part of mudita is developing a sense of we. We develop a sense of we instead of the I, they language that we tend to use. I want my rights. They are impinging my rights versus what are we as society doing about this, that, or the other. So we'll talk a little more about that when we get to the joy practice conversation in a second. But also I want to switch from what we're talking about from the envy, which really comes from within as an obstacle. And some of that within is from how we're trained in society. If we are trained, this might be an overstated word, but as consumers, as people who want something, we see the commercials on TV that makes us want it and get stuff that we don't really need. Then we have this huge, all that other kind of stuff that comes from within versus suffering and anxiety, which often is an exterior focusing in on us. Something that happens to us, comes to us. So this other hurdle, this obstacle to joy, suffering, and adversity, they talked about, and we'll start on page 147 with that. 147, the 1 to 3rd full paragraph down. And this is what I like too, about 2 sentences in. We have been clear from the beginning of this book was to be about joy in the face of life's inevitable suffering, and not some abstract or aspirational theory of joy. We want readers to know how to maintain joy at the most trying moments of our life, not just when all was, to quote the Archbishop, all hunky-doriness. Of course, it's easy to be happy when things are hunky-dory and joy, but where is the joy at this deeper level? And he gives a sort of harrowing story about these children in Auschwitz when it comes to suffering. And that's on page 146, the second full paragraph. As the Dalai Lama was speaking, I could not help but think of how we try so hard with our natural parental instincts to save our children from pain and suffering. And when we do, we rob them of their ability to grow and learn from adversity. I recalled psychologist and Auschwitz survivor Edith Eva Eger saying that the spoiled, pampered children were the first to die in Auschwitz. They kept waiting for others to come and save them, and when no one came, they gave up. They had not learned how to save themselves. And so the suffering, it can be as simple as I failed the spelling test in second grade, and I feel ashamed and whatever else. I'm never going to amount to anything. Just, how a mountain gets made out of a molehill when something like that's going on. Well, yes, you didn't do too well. And yes, your grades are suffering and whatever else, but you can continue and learn to be a better speller. Not everyone is just a speller like that. Just like not everyone is an athlete, or everyone is a mathematician, or everyone is a reader. But it takes that work at it. So how do we do that? Or how come I didn't even get invited to such and such's house for the play date? I'm upset for that birthday. Well, that's true. And the feelings of hurt are real, but you just realize, well, those might not be where we're going to put all of our friendship energy. Then we're going to go over here and we'll think of some other, all those type of things, versus we don't want our children to ever suffer, whine, cry. We're not going to use the word no in our house because we don't want the suffering of no, all these other type of things that you've heard about, versus that, if a 2-year-old doesn't learn no, when they get to be 7, it's even more difficult. When they get to be 14, it's more difficult. And when they get to be 30, it's even more difficult because they've never known no. They've never known limits and boundaries. And most of those sufferings are minor compared to the sufferings you're going on here. The same type of thing if you just do it. So without getting too far off track, the other part on 146 that I found very interesting, and this is an explanation of a Buddhist mind, a 7-point mind training on the bottom of 146 that I don't quite understand, except for this. There are in this 3 objects when we think about people. We think about family members, we think about our teachers, and we think about our enemies. Oftentimes in our relationships with family members and teachers and enemies, there can be 3 poisons, they go on to say, and 3 roots of virtue. We're going to clash, in other words, what they're saying with our family members some way or another, somehow. Well, there are going to be good times and bad times. Teachers the same, our enemies the same. And some of those poisons are attachment, anger, and delusion. We get angry, there's delusion about a friendship or relationship, those type of things, but the antidotes to all those are non-attachment, compassion, and wisdom. And so we think about family members who may have introduced suffering into our lives. Maybe it wasn't anything they really did, they just had a car accident, which meant that I had to take off more time from work, or it hurt our family budget, or blah, blah, all those other kind of things, that kind of suffering. Or maybe it's another choice they made. Uncle whoever else who always comes to Thanksgiving and is saying jokes that he shouldn't say around the kids, and all that other kind of thing that's not any fun. Or worse, a child who is constantly having a hard time with something, that type of thing. So there's a level of attachment that we want to have as a parent, right, with our kids. And we hope that they can make it on their own. If you're over-attached, I think the term is codependent. That I have to make this right for me. I'm the only one who can make this right, and giving the child no opportunity to make it right. And therefore the child is so attached to you. So there's a sense of being detached from somebody and letting them, even if it's like, okay, First time with the keys of the car, here you go. Wave, smile. That's an act of non-attachment. I don't have to be in the car, Lord, I want to be there.
I think it's
All those
faith,
other kind of
Rob. I think
things.
it's faith.
It's
Yeah.
faith.
Yeah.
That's part of it. But part of it is backing up to say, okay, and there is anxiety and suffering to some degree until they get home safely that night. But we're learning to go through that and press through that and not let our anxiety about that or our stress about that change the fact you can never go out again. I just couldn't handle that. So then everyone's maneuvering around my suffering or sense of things, which is very self-centered versus they read like this person is now, they can do it. They can get out on their own. They can get back and forth to school and whatever. They can go pick up something at the grocery store. Oh, this is going to be good. I don't have to do all the errands anymore. I guess it gets to take their sister to soccer now. It's you. And it's like, wait a minute. There are advantages to that too. So there's that part of it. So that's what I think about non-attachment, compassion, and wisdom come into helping reframe some of those relationships. And I love this quote on 148, and I put it on the sheet. You'll be surprised by joy the minute you stop being self-regarding. You'll be surprised by joy. When you stop being when any one of us stop being so self-centered, the joy that comes from, wait, it's okay that the world doesn't revolve around me and that other people can do and be and all those other, I just love the way that is a joy opening experience. Particularly then when you start thinking about others. Again, I'm not thinking about where I am on the ladder in relation to people above me, socioeconomically, intelligence, athletically, whatever it is, whatever the ladder is. But I can see, wait, hey, I'm in a pretty good position on this ladder. That's not about me. I can see people around and some people on this ladder aren't in a good position. What can I do to help them? And that's also the instance of not being self-regarding.
That makes me think about something I read this morning. It's an online daily word from Society of St. John the Evangelist. And it was saying too, talking about joy was the word today.
Mm-hmm.
And saying that again, joy is not an emotion, but we are the joy. We are to be the joy.
Mm-hmm.
And so being surprised by the joy,
Mm-hmm.
we can be the joy and spread the joy.
Right. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah. So I want to read you this, or just direct you to the story that I'm not going to read because we don't have full time to do it. The Dalai Lama recounts how he became a refugee from Tibet and how terrible that was for him. And then later on, the Archbishop teases with him on the middle of 151. Hey, yeah, if you hadn't had all that happen, you probably wouldn't have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize, that type of thing. But he took that moment of exile not as an end in itself, but that through that suffering and through his own personal habits, these pillars of joy, was able to still work for peace, find peace inside, find peace with friends, find a new beginning, let it not be the end of things. And that's the reason we give Nobel Peace Prizes to people who, like Desmond Tutu or Martin Luther King Jr. or whatever else, have gone through this huge suffering. And although we went through the civil rights in the South and in the country and in the world, and are still going through that, part of what we're experiencing even is a backlash to civil rights, and that the pendulum swings as all the things about George Floyd and the rest of folks in Ahmaud Arbery, those injustices, where there is no inner peace and where there's that level of inequality, we've got to step up and say, hey, it's not joyful for your son to be innocently jogging down a neighborhood and be attacked, whether they're black, white, male, or female. Same type of thing with the criminal. Yeah, he might have done something wrong, George Floyd, but the officer doesn't become the judge, jury, and executioner in the midst of arresting somebody. We want an arrest to be fair and by the book and go through the justice process. And when it doesn't happen that way, we get upset. And that's the good kind of upset. But we're going through that suffering, but also having some of the strength, like the Dalai Lama's had to make the most of that suffering. So this is the story I wanted to share, the farmer's horse story, if you hadn't read this, bottom of 151, again, about suffering. It reminded me of the famous Chinese story about the farmer whose horse runs away. His neighbors are quick to comment on his bad luck. The farmer responds that no one can know what is good and what is bad. And when the horse comes back with the wild stallion, the neighbors are quick to comment, this time about the farmer's good luck. So it found a boyfriend and came back. Again, the farmer replies that no one can know what is good or what is bad. And when the farmer's son breaks his leg trying to tame the wild stallion, the neighbors now are certain of the farmer's bad luck. Again, the farmer says that no one knows. And when war breaks out and all the able-bodied young men are conscripted into battle, except the farmer's son, who was spared because of his broken leg. So as life things happen, we tag them bad or good, but you never really know how it's going to turn out. And you may have been in this thing, even like with a job hunt or something like that. And I'll let you know a little bit in my life. Before I had applied for the job here, I was in a couple other job searches and those didn't go well. And so then I was available to apply to come here. And now I'm here. I'm like, well, I didn't want those other jobs. So it's bad not to get those jobs because I was interested in them. But now that I'm here, it's like, okay, God, I know what you were up to. And, Linda and I both feel very happy, very much at home here and all those other kind of things. But you never really know what is good and what is bad. You just have to keep moving on through it. I mean, there's some things obviously that are bad, but, death and sickness and illness and that kind of pain. But something more simple like a horse coming and going lets us just gain perspective on what's good or what's bad. So on 154 and 155, just to point this out, and you can go back and look at it, this idea of resistance and gaining muscle is the same way of gaining muscle in your soul or in your emotions. Again, back to Romans 12, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This mental agility that we're saying helps with all this, growing those mental muscles. And then this harrowing story on page 156 of this person who is held prisoner. And it was terrible. And he only was given one thing to read. His rosary was taken away. He couldn't have any of his prayer life. So he was given Mal's book. And he ended up reading the book, not for the content, but making the syllables of the words his rosary and changing. So see the perspective that comes with that. He was able to say, okay, this is what I've been dealt. This is how I'm going to go through it. And I'm going to keep some of myself. And what this person was also most interested in was not losing his life when he was beaten and mistreated and ill-fed and all these other types of things. He was worried about losing his own humanity and his compassion for the guards who were in front of him. That would have been the loss for him, a moral loss. The physical things he could endure, the moral failures of seeing the humanity, even of his captors, was something that would have been a failure for him. I think about Jesus saying, love your enemies, or turn the other cheek, or do unto others, or do not, again, the end of the Romans 12 passages, do not repay evil for evil. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Same type of Christian principle that comes into it in that way. And the last funny line, not funny, a father who came out of a coma and had gone through a bunch of suffering, his response was, oh yes, oh, poor for me, wasn't it terrible? He said, no, this is part of my life's curriculum. And again, the perspective on, yes, this isn't great to suffer, but I'm learning, and here I am. Same type of thing when people say better to be seen than viewed. When that type of thing, you may be having a bad day, but we're above the grass, right? And so there's the perspective for that. So real quickly on page 322, at the back of the book, there are two different practices that I invite you to give a try to one or the other or both sometime during this week. First, the mudita practice. Again, you sort of start and you center yourself as you have. But when you're envious, we have a nagging sense of dissatisfaction that effaces joy, as we're able to see only what we do not have and not what we do have. Envy is a poison tinged with guilt and self-criticism It kills our happiness and empties the world of its riches and wonders. As with the common humanity practice above, Buddhism has a practice that breaks down the bonds of isolation and jealousy to keep us separated. It is called mudita, the practice of rejoicing in others' good fortune. Just as a parent can rejoice in the good fortune of their child, we can rejoice in the good fortune of others when we expand our identity to include them, when we open our heart to the experience of their joy as our own. So I love this concept in both of these, just expanding one's heart, just like the Grinch. You see that Grinch, the heart gets bigger. This is us doing it for ourselves. So imagine the person you're supposed to, in this example, of something that you envy. Again, maybe it's Mercedes-Benz, maybe it's grandchildren, maybe it's beauty, whatever else it is that you're envying of somebody else, the perfect golf swing, something like that, right? And recognize with that person your shared humanity. Not as someone who has something you don't, but here's a human being who has hopes and dreams and disappointments and suffering, all those type of things. Recognize, just like you, that person that you envy wishes to achieve happiness and to avoid the slightest suffering too. Imagine how happy whatever it is they have must make them. Car, all those other type of things, and try to expand your heart to include them and their good fortune. Rejoice in their good fortune. Rejoice in the fact that they do not need your help because they have helped themselves. Again, that's sort of a perspective piece. And similar to adversity, it goes on here, a fundamental premise of Tibetan mind training or Lojong is to take whatever suffering and adversity you experience into your spiritual practice and use it to help you grow and develop. So you have a difficult boss. Maybe we've all been there before. You can see this as a challenge to become more responsible, tougher, or more resilient. If you're in a car accident and your car is totaled, rather than focusing on the loss of your car, be grateful that you were not harmed. If you experience a financial crisis, even bankruptcy, you can see the experience as an opportunity to empathize with others who are going through a similar hardship and expand your capacity for empathy and compassion. So again, think of the experience of suffering. Think of others who are experiencing the same situation, and how might this situation be something that is useful for you in your life's curriculum, so to speak. Number 4, to feel grateful for the opportunity that the suffering and adversity has given you. And try saying the sentence, may my suffering spare others from similar suffering. And find it a way to energize you to alleviate that kind of suffering rather than just to dwell on yourself as the recipient of it. So again, you can see how these pillars that we have, from perspective to gratitude, to humility, to acceptance, even to forgiveness or compassion, all sort of begin as ingredients to help us with our envy or to help us with these times of suffering that inevitably we do go through. Any questions, any thoughts or comments, personal sharings?
It's interesting, Rob, you brought up the golf. I play golf weekly with a number of gentlemen who are younger than I am, and I have stopped betting with them, specifically for the wallet, but also because I became obsessed with, as I get worse, as I get older, I was just trying to keep up with them, And by kind of releasing that, I really realized just yesterday that I was glad to see them play really well, glad to see them improve.
Right.
And it really helped me from a mental standpoint to just enjoy the experience with them and tell them that was a great shot for us. I've never seen you hit that before, something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
That's the perfect example. It's a silly athletic kind of thing, but it's exactly right. Golf or any type of thing, we can just get into our own heads. What's wrong with me? This is all about me. But if you turn it just like that and you say, yes, great, Boris, or all those other type of things, you're complimenting them, and that might just even ease the stress on you, and it might help you do better or the best that you can.
Very much.
You're never going to be as good as any of those people, But I can be a better me on the golf course, and I can be a better me in the household. I can be a better me in the workplace. I can be a better me in wherever else it is. And that's where the moral compass of this one prisoner didn't want to lose. I'm going to be me. I'm not going to let them take this away, this dignity away from my humanity, my compassion, because that's what I cherish most about being human. And the animals, whether even the monkeys don't have that ability to think past that emotion of this isn't fair. But we as human beings cognitively have that ability in our minds to, even if we have that reaction, to bring it down by thinking past it. And I think that's the mindfulness that we have. And we think in church circles of scripture, tradition, and reason often describe reason as just that. It's not just that we can think, because a lot of things creatures can think. We can think about the fact that we can think. And part of that is then how we do train our minds to not let those other emotions get the best of us. Okay, and in doing so, maybe we find a little more joy and bring a little more joy to the world. Right? Amen.
Amen.